Hey guys, it's Kevin. It's going to be another installment of Own It, Never Falking Seen It. This time reviewing a movie that I've wanted to watch for a very long time now. It's recently had its 10-year anniversary, and that is the movie adaptation of Watchmen. And what Watchmen is essentially about is basically we center on this alternate history where essentially superheroes are viewed as outlaws. They have actually helped alter a bunch of historical events, so a lot of things have changed. The 22 Amendment, for example, has been completely repealed, and basically the rest of the film is we see them throughout history, but most of them have since retired, and one day when one of the members of the Watchmen team, the comedian, ends up getting murdered, the rest of the Watchmen decide to come back together and basically help try to solve his murder, but also try to see the deeper conspiracy that's going on, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Watchmen overall, I was always really interested in this movie. This is a film that I've wanted to see for a very long time now, for two reasons. One, because you guys know that my most anticipated TV series of the entire year is Damon Lindelof's adaptation of this show, which is going to be coming out later this year. So, naturally, I really wanted to watch the movie, but also because I've heard this film has developed a bit of a cult following over the years, and a lot of people seem to enjoy it more than when it first came out. So I finally did give it a watch, and full disclosure, I watched the director's cut of this film, not the ultimate cut, so if you want my thoughts on that, I might watch it at a later date, but this is for the director's cut, and of what I've seen, I definitely can understand the appreciation for this film, because this film is really well done. It's a very different kind of superhero movie, but one that I really did adore overall, and we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And that's easily one of the best things about this entire movie. I think really almost everyone does a really great job here overall, especially when it comes to Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach, who I thought was incredible in this movie. I've always really liked him as a character actor, but this is easily, I think, his best performance he's ever given. I mean, this character is so complex and so multi-layered, and he really does play it as sort of like this stoic figure that is very morally ambiguous and things like that. And the situations that Rorschach goes in, he's probably the most human out of all the characters we see in this movie, and I really did love where he ended up going as a character. I thought Haley just did such an incredible job throughout this movie, and I was very impressed with his work here, especially considering he's like the main narrator of the movie. I really loved where he ended up going. I was very impressed by him throughout this film. But for me, the standout of this entire movie is Billy Crudup as Dr. Manhattan, who blew me away here. I was so impressed by his work in this movie. If a lesser actor were playing him, I feel like this character could have come off as really campy and just really over the top, but Crudup finds a way to ground this character that I wasn't really expecting, especially this one monologue he has, I thought was absolutely masterful. I was so impressed by his work here. I was already loving the movie, but whenever he came on, the movie got even better for me, and I was so impressed by his work here. Also, Jeffrey Dean Morgan is really great here as well as a character, the comedian, who, sure, he does die early on, but you do actually get to see him in some flashbacks. You understand why he was such a danger to the Watchmen. He is someone who is really not a good guy at all. He is a very unlikable character, but at the same time, you really do love getting to see his backstory, where he ends up going. He just completely relishes this character, and I was so impressed by his work here. And it makes sense now why people wanted him to really be Negan after this movie, because he really does play a he really does play a really great dick, and that's what he does very well here. I mean, this character is just a complete asshole, and he does a really good job at it. I also really did like Patrick Wilson here as Nightwing. I thought he also did a really strong job. As far as the rest of the cast goes, a little iffy for me. Matthew Goode, I thought throughout most of the movie did a really solid job, but towards the end, I did think he did get a bit too over the top for me. The two performances that were very iffy, though, were Carla Gugino. Now, not when she's in the flashbacks. When she's in the flashbacks, I thought she was really good. But, like, her present day, I just did not really work for me. I get what they were trying to do, but I just did not buy her as this character, and it really did not work. And the weakest link, though, is Malin Akerman, who I will say, I don't think she's as bad as she's been in other movies, but I really don't think that she was the right choice for this character. I really did not see her chemistry with a lot of the characters here. A lot of her line delivery does come off very flat, and just in general, I wasn't really the biggest fan of her. However, the team overall I thought worked very well together. For the most part, I think everyone here is very well casted, and I was impressed by the majority of the cast here. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, which that's the thing that really does surprise me about this movie. And one of the reasons I really wanted to see it was because of Zack Snyder, who I know, with Batman v Superman and things like that, I haven't really been the biggest fan of him, but I've always known that, he does have a fan base and people really do seem to enjoy his work. So I've kind of been wanting to look at some of his earlier works, and now I really do see why, because he had a really interesting style for this movie. The way this movie is done is not like most superhero movies. It's very dark, it's very adult, it tackles some very heavy social and also political themes, and I think he did a really great job with this film. There are times where this movie isn't taking itself too seriously, but at the same time, it does feel very grounded in reality, and I thought he definitely had a really good style to this film. There are points to this film that really do feel like a comic book, but not in an obnoxious way. Like, he definitely knew what kind of style he wanted to have here, and that really is stamped throughout the entire film. I was overall very impressed by his directing here, and the writing to this film as well is also really great. Now, I really did love the screenplay here. It's a very complex screenplay overall, especially when it comes to the characters. The movie itself is really character driven, and thank God for that, because all of these characters I think are really interesting on their own. At least most of them are, especially when you get to someone like, say, Rorschach, who is very morally ambiguous. There are a lot of things he's done that clearly. And then the writing in this film, I also really do love. And I'll just say right off the bat, I think the premise to this story is one of the most creative I've heard in a very long time. I mean, just the idea that you have these superheroes that have altered history, there's so much you can do with that. I mean, there's so many things like, little things like them just completely repealing the 22nd Amendment, so Nixon is just president for like 3 terms. That's a really interesting idea. Or the fact that, Dr. Manhattan, he ended up stopping the Vietnam War. I mean, things like that. They're little things that they shouldn't work, but they really do. And the film actually does get into some of those conflicts very well. Other things do arise, other problems happen. It really is sort of like an alternate way of viewing history, and I think it's a very interesting thing to do for a superhero film. That's not really something you think of when you think of a superhero movie, but in a way, that is very much what this film is, and that's something I was overall very impressed by. But something else that's so great about this film are the characters. I think the characters here, most of them are really well written, and what I love about nearly all of them is just the moral ambiguity in these characters. A lot of them, they have very different ways of looking at things, and there's a lot of different sort of things that they're going through, especially when it comes to someone like Rorschach, who he's someone who doesn't really seem to have much of a moral compass. He thinks people are inherently good or they're bad. There really is no gray area for him in that way. And so in that way, you really can view him as the most sort of sympathetic character throughout the entire movie, because he's looking at things in a very naive way, and that's something that I really did love getting into. And then when you contrast that with, say, someone like Dr. Manhattan, his tragic backstory, what he really thinks of the world and things like that, how people aren't the most accepting of him. I mean, things like that are so well written in this movie, and that's one of the things I really did love about this film overall. All these characters, the different circumstances they're going through, the history that they've had throughout the years, the certain paths that they've taken in life, All of that is very well written, and that's something that I really did enjoy about this movie a lot. But something else that I think they do very well is, even though we understand that the comedian is not the really good guy at all, you do see why he was so valuable to the team. You understand what they're missing without him, what he really did provide them. And I really did love seeing that, how broken the team is. You really do feel it, even though we haven't really gotten to see them before then. I thought was a really great idea. The film does kind of do like an opening montage where you see them in their heyday, and it's really effective. Most of the time I would complain about that, but I actually like that this film very quickly kind of shows you all the key events that have happened in their life, because it helps set up the story. It shows that at one time these guys were revered. These were people that were helping rather than are outlaws now, and I really did like seeing these superheroes throughout the passage of time, and I think that's something that is very well written in this film for sure. But like I also said, the film does deal with a lot of social and political themes that I wasn't really expecting, especially the idea of the Cold War that's still going on in this movie. There's always the fear that, something is going to happen with the Russians and things like that. And there's a really great scene in this movie. The opening scene, actually, is everyone questioning, what really is the government good for if Dr. Manhattan is just going to solve a lot of their problems? And again, it makes you think of a lot of different things, like, why do we really need politics if the Watchmen are helping us out and are solving all of these problems? And I think that's just a really interesting debate overall, and there's some very weighty themes in this movie that, again, I don't want to get too much into, but I really did love the way it was done here for sure. And also, let me just say, the cinematography in this film, I think, is also fantastic. I was watching this film with a friend, actually, and when we were watching it, I was told that somehow it didn't get any sort of accolades for visual effects, and that is criminal to me, because I think they look amazing here. I mean, Dr. Manhattan, yes, his look, people have said it looks a little silly, but I understand why he looks that way. You really can understand where Dr. Manhattan is coming from, and I think the look is really well done here. It looks very organic. It works for the type of character they're trying to, that they're trying to get across, and I really did like the look of him overall. All the costumes and things like that, I think, are really creative and different, and the style to this movie, yeah, it can be your typical, like, dark and gritty sort of film, but it works for this movie. You get what they're trying to accomplish, and I think they did a really good job with it overall. There are some really great effects, particularly scenes with Dr. Manhattan, just the type of powers that he can do. That's something that I think they introduced very well into the movie, the different sort of things that some of these characters can, because not all of them are superheroes, keep in mind. Some of them don't even have powers, but they're part of this sort of vigilante-esque team, and that's something that I thought was really well done. When we see their powers, when we see them in action, there are some very memorable action scenes in here, and they really do not hold back. There's a lot of great scenes in the movie. The opening scene especially is a huge standout. I love the way it was done. It's this very long, like, hand-to-hand combat sort of thing. There's blood everywhere. I mean, they really don't hold back. There's a prison scene in this movie that is just so badass, and I really loved the action scenes in this film. There really isn't a single one that I think is a dud. I think all of them are really well executed, and I was very impressed by the majority of them here. The score in this film is also very well done. You get that sort of 80s feel, and I think they handled that very well. And then the editing to this film, the director's cut, it's over 3 hours long, and it's got to be one of the fastest 3 hours that I have seen in such a long time. There wasn't really a single time when this movie was necessarily dragging for me, and I was overall very impressed by it. That being said, as much as I do love this film, there are a couple things that hold it back from being a true masterpiece, because I do think this is one of the most underrated superhero films out there, but there are just a couple things that do hold it back for me. Mainly Malin Akerman's character, aside from her acting, which, like I said, really is not the best. Her character, I don't think is really all that interesting, and they focus on her quite a lot in this movie, and whenever they cut back to her, I wasn't necessarily bored, but I just thought there could have been doing a lot more with her character. Eventually, we do get a little bit more with her, and it becomes a lot more interesting, but it just takes a little too long to get to that. Most of the film is focused on this sort of love triangle between her, Dr. Manhattan, and Nightwing, and it just feels a little bit forced. I didn't really feel the chemistry between her and Patrick Wilson. It didn't really work as well. Eventually, I started to like them more, but at least in the beginning, I wasn't really feeling it. But again, her character does eventually become interesting. Also, as much as I did enjoy the flashbacks we got with the comedian, I kind of wish there were a couple more, especially considering a twist we get in the third act of the movie. I just feel it would have been that much more impactful if we had just a few more flashbacks of him. And lastly, the ending of the movie, while I do think it's really ballsy overall and something really different, not quite sure if it entirely works, and honestly, I'm kind of confused as to what they were trying to get across with the movie. But other than that, I think this is a really well done superhero film. It's very different from anything you've seen before. It has some really great work from Jackie Earle Haley and Billy Crudup, especially. Those two, I think, are the real standouts of the movie. It has some really fantastic action sequences, it has some really creative characters overall, and just in general, I think is a really refreshing film from the types of superhero movies that we tend to get. Even nowadays, it's very different from anything that I think we've really seen before, and it does make me really excited to see what the TV show is going to do. As much as I did enjoy this movie, there's enough in here that I think if put into a TV show like it is, I think they can flesh out even more, and especially knowing that Lindelof is going to do basically an entirely new story, I'm excited to see what he really does do with it, how he tends to attack certain themes in the film, and I think that's going to be very interesting to see for sure. But overall, guys, this is an immensely entertaining and very different sort of superhero film, and for that alone, I am definitely going to give it an A minus. So overall, guys, in my review of Watchmen, let me know what you guys saw this movie overall, left your thoughts, and I know it's been quite a while since I've done an Own It Never Falking Seen It, and I really did want to make up for it. I'm hoping to do more throughout the month. We'll have to see what ends up happening, but that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.